if you must know, I do not like coming down hard on fan bases. Okay, I really don't. Although, I will admit, I did make quite an exception towards all the fanboys who kept defending Fallout 76. The way I see it, there are two reasons for anyone wanting to defend a game or wanting to force a video game company into creating a sequel that is probably never going to see the light of day. Either you are a fan of it, or you're obsessed with it. And yes, there is a difference. Probably one of the biggest fan bases is the video game series Half-Life, first developed by Valve back in 1998. That would be when the first game was released. And ever since then, Valve had made other projects such as Team Fortress and Portal. Well, Half-Life is perhaps one of the biggest titles they've ever made. The year 2007, I think I got the year correct, was when we saw Half-Life's last game ever made, called Half-Life 2 Episode 2. Ever since then, the series had come to a halt, and we've had a lot of empty promises from the creator of Valve, Gabe Newell, who kept saying, oh no, Half-Life 3 is going to take a lot of time. These things usually take a lot of time. Well, I'm sorry, but video games don't generally take this long. And, think about it. How big is Valve's budget? How big is their staff? I think it's pretty big, actually. The video game series had ended at a cliffhanger. And for years now, the fans have been harassing Newell and all the other members of Valve into making a Half-Life 3, with a flood of memes all over the internet saying, Half-Life 3 confirmed. Well, no, there is no confirmation of a Half-Life 3, I can tell you that right now. Okay, despite what the meme says. And a meme? More like the act of trolls. The Half-Life fanbase is so weird and so nerdy that you say anything to them that is against Half-Life 3 being released, they will come down on you. Oh, they will. And so, I have decided to explain why Half-Life 3 may never happen. There, you see what I have to put up with? When is anyone going to learn that the Half-Life series has been cancelled? I mean, even years prior to Mark Laidlaw's so-called Epistle 3, there was already some signs and indications that said that Half-Life was going to be cancelled. In fact, I found this article right here. Take a look at this. If you want to see the entire article, I will be sure to provide the link in the description below. This is an article written by Kotaku journalist Jason Schreier 6 years ago. One of the voice actors for Half-Life said that Half-Life 3 was not in development, and that it never was. Now, okay, I get it. There are some of you who would probably want to discredit Jason Schreier's words because of how he keeps constantly attacking YouTubers, and so no one on this site likes him very much. I get it. So, if you don't want to read his article, if you don't want to believe his story, there are two other articles from two different sites that tell the exact same story. You will find them in Eurogamer and GameSpot. I will be providing those links as well. The story itself may be old news. Well, it's still relevant as of today, I can assure you. There's even been rumors saying that there's probably going to be a Half-Life 2 prequel. Why do we need a Half-Life 2 prequel? That makes absolutely no sense. And there's also rumors about possibly a Half-Life VR. And that there were files, system files, for a Half-Life VR found in another Valve game called, I could be wrong, I do believe this game was called Dota? I don't know, but I looked it up somewhere, and for all I know, those could be files to a cancelled Half-Life project. Also, why do we need a Half-Life VR? Does anyone not remember how old Half-Life is? That's a game that came out in 1998. The graphics would be downgraded compared to today's graphics. And, why have a VR version? There are some gamers out there who hate VR. And, no doubt, there are some fans who would consider, Half-Life being played in VR as blasphemy. They would rather prefer the old-style keyboard and mouse. Now, before I argue this any further, allow me to say that my owner and I are fans of Half-Life, okay? We are fans. But we are more accepting of the situation than any of the other fans, okay? We have accepted the fact that Half-Life has been cancelled. I mean, if they really were making another Half-Life game, how come it's never been released yet? And also, don't you think that maybe Valve would want to announce their new Half-Life game at E3 or QuakeCon or any of those places? As far as I can tell, they haven't. But go ahead and say that Half-Life 3 is going to be confirmed at E3 2019. You can go ahead and say that. Keep saying it all you want, because you're going to be disappointed. Trust me. Valve even told us that Half-Life 3 had been cancelled. Epistle 3? Everyone keeps calling it a fanfic. Well, no. If it's written by Mark Laidlaw, then it's not fanfic. That was the original script for Half-Life 2 Episode 3. If they really wanted to make a Half-Life 3, then why give us spoilers? Yeah, why give us the script for Half-Life 2 Episode 3, which maybe they were going to turn into Half-Life 3? Why give us spoilers? That makes no sense. I'm sorry. Look, we wanted there to be a Half-Life 3. Okay, we really wanted one. But when we heard the bad news, we just had to accept the fact that Half-Life was cancelled. I don't like that, okay? I know, okay? Half-Life is dead. You all need to move on. I'm sorry. Now, time for me to explain more. Okay, the Kotaku article. I already showed you that. And, what else is there? Oh, yes. Valve is only sticking with card games. Yeah, like their latest game? Yeah, just card games, not first-person shooters. And, yeah, they do have a Source Engine too, but they're really not using it. Okay, really? Do you know of any games that use the Source Engine too? And I mean other than the Half-Life 3 that you keep dreaming of being released. Please, name me a few games that use the Source Engine too. Please. Other than that, Valve is mostly selling Half-Life mods. Yeah, I understand that there are some indie games. Yeah, some Half-Life indie games found on Steam. There's one that we know of as Black Mesa, which originated as a Half-Life 2 mod, now an independent game. Not developed by Valve, okay? No, Black Mesa is not made by Valve. They are made by an indie developer called the Crowbar Collective. Valve has no involvement with Black Mesa, other than the Crowbar Collective receiving Gabe Newell's blessing for making the game. Another Half-Life 2 mod sold on Steam is Prospect. Yeah, supposedly it takes place in Nova Prospect, the Combine prison. Yeah, and it's supposed to be a continuation of Adrian Shepard's story. Yeah, it's supposed to be a fanfic sequel to Half-Life Opposing Force. And I heard that it was not really received very well in terms of the story and some of the environments that were made. Yeah. Perhaps the biggest mess of a Half-Life 2 mod, and a very controversial one, is Hunt Down the Freeman. Yeah. Do yourself a favor. If you have never bought that game, don't. Well, okay, what is a game and what's a mod? Well, technically it's an indie mod, but it's been sold as an independent game, okay? I'm pretty sure you don't need Half-Life 2 on your computer in order to run it. It was bad. Now, you're probably wondering, Caesar, how does this involve Valve? Well, do you know the paid mods debacle from Bethesda, with Skyrim and Fallout 4? I do believe they call it the Creation Club. You know how people hated that? Well, there are paid mods on Steam. Yeah, those are mods that you'd have to buy. And guess who owns Steam? Valve. Oh, and there's also the Wilson Chronicles. That's also a Half-Life 2 mod. Whatever everyone may think, pressuring Gabe Newell is not going to work. Okay, he's not going to make Half-Life 3 simply because the fans want Half-Life 3 to happen. You see, Gabe Newell is a businessman, okay? He's as much of a businessman as Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. People who had dealt with pressure from a lot of the people who looked up to them, okay? Like customers and such. And listen, pressure comes with the territory for every businessman, okay? There's always stress in the job of a businessman, and Gabe Newell is a trained professional. So he is not going to give in to pressure, okay? He's not going to make Half-Life 3 simply because you want him to. And all these mods and everything that you keep pressuring on him, it's not going to work. No. I mean, seriously, that would be like asking for EA or pressuring EA into making a better video game rather than the ones that they've been making lately. Or, you know how EA canceled the supposedly open-world Star Wars game? Well, we can go ahead and have mods and pressure them into making it again. It's not going to happen. Knowing EA, it's not going to happen. Well, knowing Gabe Newell, Half-Life 3 is never going to happen. I'm sorry, did I say mods? I meant memes. We can go ahead and keep attacking Gabe Newell with memes, but it's not going to work. There. That's what I meant to say. Tell me more lies, tell me sweet little lies. That may be a song for Todd Howard, but it's also one for Gabe Newell. Now you can go ahead and show me the video of Gabe Newell saying, "Look, man, these things take time." Just so you know, I've already seen the video, and I don't care. In the past, we've had video game developers offering us empty promises. Okay? So, really, this sort of thing you should be getting used to by now. These things take time, Gabe Newell says. Well, usually there's a reason for something to take a lot of time. Now, some of you would probably come up with an excuse, saying that it took 26 years to make Wasteland 2, a sequel to a video game that was released back in 1988. Well, I have a different story. That back in those years, there were no plans for a Wasteland 2. The sequel was never being made. Seriously, they were just resurrecting an old title that was originally not going to have a sequel. Meanwhile, we have the first two games of the Max Payne series, and we did not get Max Payne 3 until 9 years after the release of Max Payne 2. I'm sure they must have had a reason for waiting that long. Maybe there were no plans for a Max Payne 3 originally, or, I don't know, maybe they were waiting for the graphics to be better, or something. In fact, there are some Half-Life fans saying that maybe that's the reason why Half-Life 3 is taking so long. Or maybe Half-Life 3 is not being made at all. There may even be people coming up with an excuse saying that it took 7 years for Fallout 3 to be made after the release of Fallout Tactics. Well, maybe it took such a long time because, I don't know, Interplay lost their ownership of the Fallout series to Bethesda, and maybe also because there are a lot of fans who don't want to talk about Fallout Brotherhood of Steel. There is also the video game series known as Darksiders. The reason why Darksiders 3 was not made until 6 years after the release of Darksiders 2 was because the original publisher of those games, THQ, was shut down indefinitely. Everyone in that company had lost their jobs. And practically the whole company had went bankrupt. And so later on, the Darksiders series was auctioned and later bought by a company called THQ Nordic. Perhaps there are those of you who remember the MechWarrior series. Well, the reason why MechWarrior 5 was not being made until several, and I do mean several, years later was because the MechWarrior franchise was suffering from a lawsuit. So you see, there should always be a reason for a video game being delayed. And Valve has not been giving any good reasons or explanations for Half-Life 3 being delayed. They have been rather vague about it, in fact. The other thing I want to point out is that the voice actors are either dead or they've moved on to other projects. The voice actress for Alex Vance, I forgot her name, she's been moving on to different projects, such as television shows, and she was also one of the voice actors for the video game The Last of Us. And I should also point out that 3 of the voice actors, specifically, the voice actors for Half-Life 2, are dead. I'm of course referring to the voice actors for Wallace Breen, Father Gregory, and Eli Vance. They're all dead. Now, granted the fact that their characters did die in the Half-Life 2 saga, the fact that many of the actors have died or moved on, there would still be a lot of backlash if Valve decided to recast the characters. Another important fact is not how the Half-Life games were made, but when they were made. The releases of Half-Life 1 and 2 predate today's political correctness era, and there would probably be some people wanting to revisit the first Half-Life and argue about the fact that there are no female NPCs. Well, except for the Hazard Course hologram, and let's see, what else? Oh yeah, the female assassins. But there aren't really any female scientists or female security guards. Now, I'm not someone who would argue about these sort of things, but I reckon that today's feminists would want to make a controversy out of that. For silly reasons, obviously. Meanwhile, Half-Life 2 has a black female character, and no doubt there would be a lot of people complaining about that, even though that sort of thing has always been in the Half-Life series. I mean, Alex Vance is one of the most high-profile characters in the series, but there would still be people arguing about her. I don't get it. And, well, I can tell you that there has already been an SJW complaining about the fact that there are no blonde-haired characters in the Half-Life series. Yeah, I must have found that somewhere in a Steam forum, but there was someone complaining about that. And even if Half-Life 3 does get made, it will probably be contaminated with loot boxes and microtransactions, since that seems to be every video game company's policy nowadays. Also, what if Half-Life 3 becomes too short of a game? Or what if it has a story that does not appeal to any of the fans? Or what if they decide to either kill off or replace Gordon Freeman and have Alex Vance as a new protagonist? That would mean that Half-Life would be accused by SJWs for feminizing the franchise. Again, I would not be making these arguments, but I imagine that those are the arguments that today's SJWs would make. It is not a bad thing to be a fan of something, but you're all holding on to something that has been dead for a long time. Sometimes, the best thing to do is to let go. Meanwhile, you're all saying that you cannot live without Half-Life, and that your life is incomplete without Half-Life 3. Well, I'm going to make the exact same argument that Tony Stark made with Peter Parker in Spider-Man Homecoming.
If you're nothing without this suit, then you shouldn't have it, okay?
If you are nothing without Half-Life 3, then you shouldn't play Half-Life. Hoping for a Half-Life 3 is futile. Or, as the Space Marine librarian in Dawn of War says, hope is the first step on the road to disappointment. After talking about all this, I am no doubt going to be receiving a lot of dislikes and hate comments from the Half-Life fans. But I felt like that I needed to talk about this because the arguments for Half-Life 3 appear to be unending. Valve tried to give some closure to the fanbase, but it seems that closure is something that the fans don't want. They only want Half-Life 3, a video game that may never happen. A moment of silence for the Half-Life series. The way I see it, there are two ways as to how Half-Life can ever be reawakened. It would have to be rebooted or given to a different company. Those are the only two ways I can think of. And for the record, I'm not expecting anyone here to agree with me. If you disagree with these arguments, well, then you disagree. I will not hold anyone against it. No. Thank you all for watching. As always, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Goodbye!